So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for you guys to hear from these panelists and to discuss these very important topics with us. My name is Cindy. I'm on the EF Gap Year communications team, which means that I have the wonderful privilege of working with students and alumni like the ones you're about to meet to help amplify and share their stories with the broader community. So our hope with this webinar, with this panel, is really to show that travel is such a deeply personal experience, and everyone's stories and everyone's experiences are going to be totally unique, and there really is no one universal experience. And I really hope that with hearing our travelers' stories, maybe there's something in there that is inspiring for you, that resonates with you. And honestly, even if you come from a totally different background than these students, I hope that everyone has something that they can take away with and having learned from this. So just in terms of what to expect, we'll start with, first introducing our panelists, and then we'll discuss a few topics that we've prepared for you guys. Please ask questions throughout. We might not answer everyone as we go, but my colleague Rebekah will be in the background. Thank you, Rebekah. Rebekah with a C, fielding those questions, and we'll have a section for a Q&A at the end as well. So without further ado, let's see if this, all right, great. So for the panelists, I was thinking it might be helpful to just, of course, start with your name, your pronouns, where you're from or calling in from right now, of course, where you went for your gap, and as a fun icebreaker, the best thing that you ate on your gap, which I'm sure is a very hard question, but try not to think too hard about it. So yeah, whoever wants to jump in, feel free. I'm gonna call in Alexa. Sorry, please go ahead.
Okay. I'm Rebekah. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I am currently residing in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, but I'm from Vermont. I went to Shanghai, China for a double module for my gap semester. So I was there for 2 language modules. And the best thing I ate on my gap year was probably fried soup dumplings. They're really good. So yeah.
Xiaolongbao, but fried. I actually don't think I've ever had that. It's amazing.
Okay, so my name is Alexa. I go by she, her. I'm from Houston, Texas, and my modules that I did an internship in Dublin and volunteer service in Thailand. The best thing I ate was definitely all the Thai food. I had never had pad Thai before, and what's really interesting about Houston is we have like Chinatown, amazing Chinese, Asian food. And I had never tried it before, so it was really good.
Did it ruin American pad Thai for you, or are both still?
It definitely did.
Hi, my name is Faith. My pronouns are she, her. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I went to Tokyo for language and Sydney for internship. And my favorite thing I ate would probably be okonomiyaki in Tokyo.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yes, please describe what the dish is for those who are not initiated.
It's like a savory kind of pancake thing. They mix up cabbage and egg and like this like scallion kind of pancake. Sometimes they put noodles on them too. And it's like huge, and you usually eat it with your friends. You chop it up in like kind of like a pizza kind of thing. So
that's amazing. And it's a very savory dish as well, right? Like lots of flavors and tastes.
Yeah, it's really great.
That's awesome. I miss it. All right, thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. I think, as a classic first question to kick off this discussion, maybe we can just start by sharing what inspired you to want to take a gap and do this program. Faith, do you want to, I'll just call on you guys in case.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was already in college when I decided that I wanted to take a gap year. I was a freshman, And I just was like not having a good time at school. And I was like, I need to figure out something to do because obviously this is not going good. This is not right for me. And I always wanted to do some traveling. I knew I wanted to do some traveling during school. And I got an email for this program. They're like, here's this new program called EF Gap. And I'm like, this is perfect. So it kind of just like played right into my hands.
Love that. And had you been abroad previously before the program?
Yeah, the only place I had been was Japan before the program. But yeah.
You got to experience that more in depth. I see.
Yeah.
Cool. Rebekah, what about you?
So I had a really rough senior year in the sense that I had transferred to a high school in a different state and then transferred and then graduated. And then they were like, some of your credits were actually electives. You need a math credit and an English credit. So I actually needed half a credit in both of those. And so I was only, my senior year I was a super senior. So I was there for an extra year, which was really, really frustrating for me because I had graduated and gone through this whole process. And then they were like, oh, we can't give you this diploma because you started high school in one state and moved to another. And they just didn't weight certain classes the same. And so I was really annoyed and really frustrated. And the icing on the terrible cake was my college admissions counselor made an error and forgot to send in, I did dual enrollment. So I took college classes while I was in high school. She forgot to send in those transcripts along with my recommendation letters. So to every school I applied, I got rejected because I had sent in an incomplete application. So I was really annoyed and really frustrated. And I said, I'm not going to school right now. And my dad had taken a gap year after he had graduated high school, and he had lived with, I have family that lives in Ireland. And so he kind of gave me this ultimatum of, you can travel and do your own thing, or you can go to Ireland. I don't want you in this house for, a whole extra couple years or whatever, however long you want to take a break for. And so we went to a gap year tour or a gap year fair, and I met a person from EF, and we started talking, and it just kind of got the ball rolling from there. And I had traveled with EF before, so I knew the company. My brother had actually worked for them. He didn't work in the travel part of it. He was a chef. My brother's a chef, so he worked in a catering kind of business. But so I was very familiar with EF, and it just kind of grew from there. And yeah.
Wow. Even though it's a really unfortunate beginning to your story, I'm glad that the cards fell in a certain way that you were able to have this rewarding experience. And Alexa, what about you?
So after high school, I started this nanny business, and I started working and working and working. And I just didn't feel like I needed to go to college quite yet, nor did I really want to. And I had, just like Rebekah, I had traveled through EF before, so I had some trust. My sister also traveled through them as well. And so one day I got an email, or I was just seeing all this promotion on Facebook and Instagram, and I was like, you know what? What's gonna hurt to just check it out? So I was checking it out, and I came up with this whole proposal for my family, and I was just like, listen, you know me, I've always wanted to travel. I love it. And I feel like this can actually bring some great experience and memories to my life. So I saved up a lot of money. I worked my butt off just so I could go on the trip. So yeah, that's pretty much.
Thanks for sharing. I mean, it definitely seems like you and Faith kind of share that need for, needing some space and time to really think about what you were doing and how you were spending your time, whether working or in school. And my follow-up question, Rebekah kind of touched on this, but I guess it's kind of two parts. First, what sorts of familial, was your family supportive at first? And if not, how did you help them warm up to this idea? And also, a huge part of who we are is where we grew up, right? And the communities that we grew up around. And so I'm curious, were there people in your communities that had done gap years or were doing things like this? Or were you the trender or the outlier?
So that's a great follow-up question. No one had ever heard of this before. They were like, where are you going? With who? Do you know all the information? And, there was all these different questions. And through, I believe I talked with Tony. I don't know if you know who that is, but she was the person that I was chatting with for a while. And we just grew, even though I had never met her before, we just grew this great communication and almost like friendship, as far as like her being able to tell me all the answers that I needed to my questions. And with my mother, she was very, go fly, be a bird, and then my dad's like, no, I'm super protective and I need to know all the information before I even let you go or even think about letting you go. And eventually he saw, with all the information and everything like that, he saw that it was going to be a good thing for me to do. So
That's great. Faith, I saw you were nodding your head earlier. Do you want to share your perspective on this?
Yeah, so the concept of a gap year was like completely new to my family. So I told them like, okay, I want to take off from school. I want to do this program. They were like, no, you can't leave school. If you leave school now, you'll never want to go back, and stuff. And I'm like, no, I know that's not the case. I know I'm going to go back to school if you guys just like allow me to do this program. And it took a little bit of convincing. Like I literally had to gather as much information and kind of like present this idea to my mom, like, look, this is going to be a good program. Like, just let me try it out and we'll go from there and you'll see, like, it'll be really influential. So it took a little bit of like convincing. And even then, some of my family, because I only took a semester with EF, but I did take a whole year off school. And I told my family, like, even though I was only going to spend one semester traveling, I still wasn't going to go to school the other semester. And they're like, you should still go to school that semester, blah, blah. Like it was just like such a hard concept for them to understand, like me not going to school. So it was a little bit difficult at first, but then afterwards they all warmed up to the idea, and now everybody thinks that it was really good, really influential thing to do.
That's great. I'm glad. And I remember you mentioned when we chatted earlier that like culturally or like with the communities that you were raised in, um, even the idea of taking time off school is a little new, right? Like, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. So like, especially like in the Black community, for us, it's like you need to be doing something like all the time. Like you don't really get a break. You're either in school and you go right to work and you work and you work and you work, then you retire and now you can do what you want, or you come from high school and you're immediately working, and you just spend your life providing for your family, kind of like that kind of thing. Like it's kind of, I don't want to say it's looked down upon to like take time off and kind of like focus on you, but in a way it kind of is, because it's like you need to take care of your family first before you can really like, so the idea of leaving school and just taking time to just like kind of do nothing really was completely brand new to them. They're like, you need to be doing something. But I have to explain, like, sometimes it's okay to, be a little bit selfish or like take time to yourself, like I don't have to dedicate my whole life to something that I don't want to do just for the sake of providing, So it was a new topic for sure, but I think they can kind of understand the concept now.
Wow. And it appears you did go back to school after all, right? Would you say that it's yeah, like how has it affected that path?
Yeah, so the school that I'm at right now, I applied to a little bit before I left. And when I came back home from my gap semester, I ended up changing my major to Japanese due to going to the language school in Tokyo because I had so much fun learning. And I feel like, well, now I'm a Japanese K through 12 major. So when I'm done, I'll get a teaching certification and stuff like that. And I just feel like now I really found something that I really want to do. For a long time, I had absolutely like no clue where I was going. I was just going to school because I knew that I had to go to school, like, or else, like there was really no other option. Like I had to go to school. And so I just picked a major just to like pick a major. But now I actually really do enjoy what I do and I love school now. So it worked out pretty good.
That's amazing. To borrow something that actually Rebekah with a C, my colleague on the keys here, has said, taking a gap in many ways is about shifting from I should to I want. Sort of like as we grow up, it's so easy to just live a life checking boxes or like doing the next thing because we're told to. But it really is a way to kind of reset and live with a bit more purpose while still, being able to fulfill those obligations and be a productive member of society, which we all are. So awesome. Thank you guys for giving that context. Well, I guess Rebekah with the K, you mentioned that, luckily your dad was supportive of this idea. Were there other like cultural influences growing up that kind of factored into this, or was it really just like a positive, like he inspired you and he supported you kind of thing?
I mean, honestly, I was the one that had to be convinced. My dad kind of bullied me into, he was like, you're not staying here, you need to leave. And I was just like, I'll stay home and work for a year and reapply. And he was like, no, do something with your life. And I was like, oh, okay. So it was a weird kind of like, my dad was like, no, you're going, you're doing something. He was I did not want to go and learn about this kind of stuff because I was like, I'll just work. I'll, get a retail job. And he was like, you will be miserable. And like, I had decided, I declared a major when I had applied to a bunch of schools where you like fill out your application. You're like, this is what I'm planning on majoring in. And so I had chosen journalism because it was just kind of like the closest I could think of to what I was interested in. And then during my gap year, I was able to do ethnographic research, which is part of how you get college credit through the program is you do an ethnographic research project. And that like totally shifted like what I wanted to study. So now I study anthropology. And I'm an archaeology minor, and hopefully I will be working in museums in the, after a couple more years of school. Unfortunately, I chose a line of work that requires at least a master's, but I love what I'm studying. I love school, and the biggest issue I had, like, it wasn't really a cultural thing, but being disabled and having like my parents like freak out, like, what if something goes wrong? Like, what do you do? And like, it was, very much my mother that was very concerned, and my dad was less concerned. He was like, you'll figure it out. You'll be fine. And so my dad's kind of the push the baby out the nest, and if it flies kind of guy. So,
That's a perfect segue because my next question was going to be what sorts of fears or concerns, if any, maybe you didn't have any at all, but yeah, what were you worried about before traveling? Maybe Rebekah, if you want to elaborate a bit more on that point and just how you worked through that fear.
Yeah. So I'm fairly able-bodied in the sense that I don't need physical aids when I walk and that kind of stuff. So I was very lucky in that sense. I could, climb stairs and do that kind of stuff, which in Europe, during the Europe tour, that was the biggest hurdle, I think, for probably most disabled people. And most disabled people, I now live in Europe, and I work with the student disabilities organization at my university. So it's still a constant kind of struggle there. But when I was in China, there were elevators and, pretty much everywhere. So it was much easier access. The one thing was, who do you reach out to, especially in a country that, healthcare, especially for, invisible disabilities, is so, divided. And who do you reach out to, and how do you connect with people and say, I'm having a flare up, I'm having a really hard time, like, I need some slack, like, because obviously it's school, like, I was going to the language school. So I was doing school. So I had to show up to class and that kind of thing. So it was hard to communicate to my teachers, like, hey, like, there was a cultural divide, but I was able to communicate with the staff at the language school and the staff through EF Gap. And they were able to communicate more clearly to my host family than I could. Which was very helpful because my host mom was like, oh, you need to go to a doctor. And it's like, no, I know what's wrong. Like, this is just how I am sometimes. And so having to learn how to cope with that and create this kind of new normal of existing in like, oh, this is like what happens in a flare up and how do I manage it? And if I hadn't learned how to do that, then I would not be comfortable to do what I am currently doing, which is live, in across the ocean from my family and that kind of thing. And so it's,
What do you think helped you feel more comfortable taking the leap? Like, were there things that you did or thought before traveling that made you feel more confident?
I tried to make kind of like a, if this specific scenario goes wrong, what are my steps? And at least kind of have like, okay, I have these emergency numbers. This is who I can contact. For me, like the biggest thing is just like being open, communicating. Like I was very honest when I like applied at EF. I was like, here's my situation. And they were like, awesome, we can work with that. And that was awesome to be able to communicate like, okay, like this is what's going on. And my host family, there's a huge, not only a language barrier, but this cultural barrier. And so they're not understanding. And so I could reach out to someone from the school. And so like having a network that I had kind of pre-established, like I knew I had a very strong support system at home. So I knew I could call my dad in case of emergency and cry on the phone if need be. And I did have days where I was like, this sucks. And I would call my dad at 2 p.m. in Shanghai, China, and he would pick up the phone at 2 a.m. in Vermont. And he would be, half awake, but, he'd have to talk me through a panic attack or whatever. But having a really nice network at home that was willing to support me when I was, 12 hours ahead was very helpful as well.
So yeah, it sounds like, right, having that strong support network, your go-to people, and being upfront and communicative with the staff so they can sort of help you manage that and take care of the logistics and make things as easy as possible. Yeah, that makes sense. Alexa, what about you? What were your fears about doing this that you had?
So I'm a huge family person, and originally I knew I was going to miss them, but I didn't think I would miss them as much as I did. That's one of them, I guess one thing. And then the other reason why I might have been nervous and whatnot was specifically, because I'm a woman. Like I felt nervous and afraid, but it didn't stop me. But I did have those concerns. Also being a person who's mixed, I'm half Hispanic and half white, and I just wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how people were going to accept me in a different country, and I was nervous. But when I did meet my cohort, I saw the diversity, and I felt almost at home because here in Houston, it's super diverse. And so I knew I had people that I could lean on. Sorry, my cat's meowing at me, but I knew I had people that I could lean on, talk to, who maybe felt the same way I did. And that was a huge factor. But I also had times where I felt just completely different. I felt like my goals, my outlook on life was just different from everyone else. And so sometimes I felt lonely, and I would have to depend on my tour director or people from EF who would call me, every now and then. And I had to depend on myself, most importantly. I had to make sure that I was staying true to the person that I am, that I wasn't changing because I had these fears. And yeah.
All of that. And yeah, we'll definitely unpack after this, what that experience was like that you guys had in terms of how people interacted with you or how that shaped things. But Faith, what about you? Did you have any fears or concerns beforehand?
I think the only fear I kind of had was like wondering if I might be like ostracized maybe within like my own cohort. I knew going to this program there was not going to be a lot of people who look like me, and so it's like you worry about like how you're going to fit in, or like how are these people going to, they're going to be open and like welcoming to you, or if they're going to be like, kind of standoffish. So that was my like concern. But when I got there, fortunately, everything was good and my worries were for no reason. So I got lucky.
I'm glad to hear. All right, so you guys, had your moments of inspiration, you convinced your parents and or your parent convinced you, you start your journey. And I guess, now would be a great time to transition to talking about that on the ground experience that you guys had. And I know it's so broad to be like, how did your identity inform your experiences? But I guess we could start with, were there moments where you felt like, I guess, like, how did people receive you abroad? And was there anything surprising about how that went? Whoever feels compelled can jump in.
I think the biggest thing is I was very nervous coming in as someone who's queer, going to a country where, gay marriage isn't legal and that kind of thing. And having that experience, I was like, I'm kind of uncomfortable having this conversation with my host family. And I found that it really wasn't something, it was not, expected of me to feel, or be like within the Chinese normal. I think there's kind of a very strict kind of Chinese, like what people want you to be. And I'm definitely not that. And so my host family was incredibly accepting in that sense, which was like a huge, I really knew nothing about Chinese culture before I went. And so I was very nervous because I had heard stories, but I had never experienced anything. And so going to a fairly diverse Chinese city was awesome. Being able to communicate. My mom's Native American. And so being able to communicate and like the little, the daughter of my host parents, who I called my host sister, she would always ask me questions, be like, oh, we learned about this in American history, and like, tell me more. And like, she was like, oh, we learned about the Indians. And I was like, okay. And she was like, tell me more. And I was like, how much more do you want to know? And she was great. She wanted to know everything. And she would, go to school the next day and be like, well, actually, this is what happened, and I was like, don't do that. I'm going to get in trouble for like, but it was like amazing. The acceptance I felt. Like I was very nervous about how people would react to me in general as someone who is tattooed and has facial piercings and is loud and, a little bit chaotic. And, people really enjoyed me. And for the most part, even like people on the street, like there were people that would turn around and be like, holy crap, there's a white girl. And there were, which is ridiculous in my mind, but to them it was, amazing. And, there were times where I had a classmate who apparently, according to several people in the Chinese public, looked like Robert Pattinson, which no one else got, but he got stopped regularly for photos. And like, it was just, he was like, he gave up communicating that he was not Robert Pattinson because they still wanted a photo anyways. And he was like, yeah, sure. And, but for the most part, people were always incredibly kind. And I was so scared and I was so afraid of the alienation that I was convinced I was going to face. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to sign up for this. And then I was like, oh no, this is terrifying. And then I actually went into it and I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like I would run into, I would go to a shop and I became friends with the guy who worked at the corner store by the apartment complex my host family lived at. And, I made friends with a guy who owned a calligraphy store just because I stopped in and like we talked for a while. And like, I think there's a saying in anthropology that people have always been people. There's graffiti in Pompeii and that kind of thing. And seeing like, kids playing regular, games on the street that, we were so used to, and people just being, happy to exist. There was a security guard at our apartment complex at the gate. He would always, open the gate for us. And like, we had our key fobs, we could get in, but he always wanted to ask how our day was and say, hi, how are you? And he was, and people have always been people and people will always be people. And I think you can have a lot of fear going into a situation and say, oh, they might not accept this about me. And I think 9 times out of 10, they're not going to really care that you're different. They just want you to be a decent person, and they're going to be a decent person in turn. So.
Wow, I really love that. And I mean, ultimately, isn't that the the pinnacle of travel, right? Like to realize that deep down we really are all just humans with our own struggles and hopes and joys. It's something that I'm curious about, or would love to hear more about, is just the experience of bonding and connecting with your host family. I don't know if you have any like advice or, like how did you establish that rapport, especially when you had those concerns initially?
My host family, I made my host grandfather watch. He had never seen Mulan. We watched Mulan. Everyone went on vacation and he stayed to like babysit us because they had a vacation planned, and then they kind of got contact and were like, "Hey, do you want to take on these kids?" And they were gone for, a day. It wasn't a big deal, but the grandfather stayed behind just to make sure that we were okay. And we watched Mulan with him, and me and my roommate did face masks, and we had these crazy, Asian beauty is insane. So that, especially skincare. So we had these crazy character face masks on, and it was, you just kind of have to be friendly. Like they knew how nervous I was when I got there, because I'm sure I looked like an absolute deer in headlights. I showed up, I got out of the taxi, and I was like, oh my God, what is happening? And they were so kind and welcoming. And I was so like, they were just, so willing to let me into their family. And part of it was I had to make an effort, because when I first got there, I spent a lot of time hiding in my room with my roommate who spoke very good English, because that was, my time to not be surrounded by people speaking a language that I was still struggling to comprehend, and, having these interactions that I was so anxious to be a part of. And, so I left my room and I went and I, sat out and I did homework, and I had, my host mom would check my homework and, that kind of thing. And then their nephew, and, I was there during the Mid-Autumn Festival, which is a huge festival that is really focused on family. And so they brought the entire extended family was sitting in this tiny, crowded around this kitchen table, and we were all, eating, and, my host grandpa, was like, try this. And like, they were constantly like, every time I looked somewhere, someone was putting food on my plate, and it was like, eat this, like try. They were so excited to have someone from a different culture. They wanted to learn my culture, and I was there to learn theirs. And so, I think it goes back to that same thing of like, you need to make an effort, and they're going to make an effort in turn. It's the idea of like, treat people the way you wanted to be treated. And my host grandpa runs the Shanghai Marathon every year. He's incredibly fit, and it's insane. Like this man would get up at 4 a.m. and go for a run and get back at 6 a.m. and then shower and have breakfast. And I'd be like rolling out of bed and like running to class, because I'm not a morning person. But like, I started exercising with him sometimes. And like, it's just small things. Like I would go on walks with my host mom, and, you just kind of have to bond in that way.
I was laughing because I feel like the Chinese love language, the unofficial one, is forcing food on your guests or your family members. So no, but I think that's so well said. And yeah. And talking about Chinese culture, and I think this is sort of true for many East Asian countries, even in the cities like Shanghai that are quite international, is that they tend to be, kind of homogenous. And I know, and being Chinese myself, having lived in Beijing, I know that people can sometimes stare and sort of like make a big fuss when you don't look like the norm. And I'm curious, Faith, when you were in Tokyo, how, were there, what were the sort of interactions that you had with locals, and any learnings with that?
Well, Japanese people are like really to themselves, like they really do not, like they might glance, but they really are too timid to come and try to like ask you anything. But I did live a little bit far out from Tokyo. I live like an hour and 20 minutes outside of like regular Tokyo. So when I would get on the train way out there, sometimes people would get on and they'd look over, they'd glance like, who is she? Like we've never, But most of the time I didn't really get too much. I did have somebody like touch my hair one time. So I was like, oh, okay. I was at the cash register and I leaned over, and the lady, she grabs my hair and she was like, oh, so pretty, so nice. And I was like, okay, thank you. But, But yeah, Japanese people are they're very conservative, they're very quiet, you know, so they might stare, but they're not gonna make a big fuss about like anything, even if they're like super uncomfortable about something. The most you'll ever see them do is like glance, you know, look around, especially in Tokyo. You know, maybe if I was like in the countryside, people might have come up to me more and like said stuff, but in Tokyo, especially, they're really like to themselves. But I did notice sometimes, you know, like on the train or like if I was at the train station by my house, since it was so far out, you know, sometimes people would like, you know, they'd look or they might like walk a little bit close to me to like look a little bit more, but that was about it.
Faith, I actually have a question for you. Did you ever have parents like at a train station like push their kid to you, be like, practice your English, practice your English?
You know, like,
That happened to me all the
I
time.
remember, like sometimes when I would be like sitting at the train stop, they would have their like little kids and like the little babies would be like speaking, practicing. And I don't know if they'd be like wanting me to like turn my head and be like, oh, very good. Or like, I don't know, but I would always kind of just be like, you know, like,
Yeah, that was a big thing that I was not always prepared for, but that was the quickest way to get me comfortable in China was have children. I mean, I'm not a kid person by any means, but having a tiny little, you know, Chinese 5-year-old walk up to me and say, hello, my name is
Yeah.
whatever, what's your name? And I was like, oh, that's so cute. And her mom's like, good job in the background.
Yeah, it's like it's really common in Japan, especially to see like they take the little kids walking throughout the day and you'll see them and they'll be hi, hi, you know, and you go, oh hi, you know. But yeah, sometimes when I was at the train station, people would pull up their like strollers and like they would sit next to me and I'd be like, oh, okay, like hi. But yeah, it would be funny sometimes.
You know, something about that question that I want to um, hold on to is this assumption, or not really assumption, but I guess, okay, other way to phrase it is, you know, do people always know that you're American? You know, I mean, this is just like generally for all of you, but I think it's funny that, yeah, like even that might vary depending on where you are, who you are, you know, that they may not even realize that you do speak English. Again, as a, you know, Asian person myself, like when I go abroad, people don't see me as an American, you know, like because how would they know? So I think that's also an interesting point. I don't know if you guys have any comments on that part.
So I do. We were in France, and for some reason, I don't know what they saw in me, but they thought I was French. I was like, I mean, no. And you know, of course, my Southern American accent comes out, and it's like, oh crap, she's not. But yeah, I thought that was really odd. But throughout my whole life, nobody has ever gotten my mixed race right before, so it didn't really shock me that that someone thought it was something else.
If I recall, I remember you said something when we chatted about how, wait, was it Barcelona, that when you were there, people kind of made certain assumptions about you because of how you looked, but then
Yes, definitely Barcelona for sure. But luckily with the cohort, we had a native Spanish speaker, so she helped a lot. And yeah, I don't know a lick of Spanish, so
you know, so we talked about some of these differences that kind of occur when we travel. And I'm curious though, I mean, we did kind of touch on this, especially with a lot of the things Rebekah was just talking about, but what were the moments of belonging, or you know, whether it's unexpected moments of belonging or moments of connection that you found on your travels?
so there were times where I felt extreme, like I said earlier, there were times where I felt extremely alone. I felt like I was different. I felt like I didn't belong. And my tour director, he was like the person that I leaned on the most in Thailand. We would have tea time, like we would go get mango sticky rice because he knew that I just loved it, and he became like my best friend. Because if I didn't have him, I probably I probably would have left, to be honest, because I was so in my own head. And he really helped me throughout all that. But then whenever we came back and did the Leadership Academy, we were doing all these different activities and whatnot. And there was this one where we spoke about, I think we wrote some kind of essay, or we just spoke about something that we had gone through. And a lot of people opened up and they shared their stories about just different things that have happened in their lives. I mean, to the point where all of us are just sitting there crying. And it was a moment of, wow, like we may all have different backgrounds and I may not get along with you, but we relate in a sense of we all go through things. We all, have our downfalls, and we all have the times where we're just the happiest. And I felt like that really made us all connect. In the end of it all, we all felt like, maybe I'll never see you again, but at least I have this moment with you where I feel connected to you. But I do still have some friends that I still keep in contact with to this day. And it's like, whenever we get on the phone with each other and we talk about, oh, remember that time when we were in Paris and this happened? It's like, it almost brings me back to that moment where I was 19, like walking around a city that I'd never been to before. So, yeah.
Well, that, yeah, the moments of belonging that you even share with your cohort, despite them all coming from different places and backgrounds, is definitely powerful. And I mean, whether you like it or not, you're all forever marked by this experience. And there's only like a small group of people in this world who fully understand what you guys went through, and like what it was like to live abroad for in such a way. And Faith, what about you? Were there moments that you felt unexpected moments of belonging, either with the places you visited or anyone that you met?
Yeah, one time when I was in Sydney, I was walking home from the grocery store, and this lady and her daughter, they just come up to me and they're like, "Oh, are you new in the neighborhood?" And I was like, "Yeah, I just got here like last week." And so we started talking, and she asked me like where I was from and stuff like that. And then she was like, "Well, we live right down here at this house that you just walked past. Like this is our house." And she was like, "If you ever want to come over for lunch or anything," she was like, "knock on the door, come over. We'll our door is open." Like they're like, "We understand it can be weird, being in a new country and stuff. So it'd be nice to have like kind of like mock family kind of thing." Um, and I was gonna go over there. I was, but I never got the chance to because literally we had to pack up and leave so soon. So I wrote them a note and I put it in their mailbox. And I felt so bad because they opened up their home to me, but it was really unexpected. Like I was totally not expecting some people to like be so nice and welcoming.
That's so lovely. The Australians just seem like a nicer breed of people. And I remember, when you were on the European immersion as well, you mentioned like being in London. There was um, an exciting discovery that you made.
Oh, like when I was, because I left some hair products at home. And I was like, okay, if I can just like find the pharmacy, I might be good. And I did find the pharmacy, but I also found the beauty supply store. And I was like, wow, because that's where I get all my stuff for my hair, from beauty supply stores. And so the fact that they just like, it was right around the corner from the hotel too. It was like right there. And I was like, this is amazing. This is great, because it kind of reminds me of home, like a little bit of familiar sense.
I love when that happens, when there's like pockets of when you're so far away from home, but there's a little something that reminds you of a piece of your own home. Okay, I'm realizing that we have been, I can honestly talk about this for hours, but to make sure that we, have time for those questions in the end, I guess I would love to pivot to just some like general reflection and advice from you guys. I guess one thing that I definitely want to ask is, you know, how has this experience changed the way that you think about either your own identity or just like your relationship to the world? I know it's a big question, but.
I would say I think the biggest thing is I gained a lot of confidence. I was kind of like, I can navigate the Shanghai metro alone, going to university in Amsterdam where everyone speaks English, no worries. I just recently gave a TED talk through my university's TEDx event. So it like that's stuff that I never would have thought myself capable of until, I kind of moved to China and I, learned all this amazing stuff and I was able to kind of step up and say, oh, I can do this. This is easy. Like this, it looks like a mountain, but it's like, you just got to climb it and then, get started. Step one is to, take the first step. And it
Yes.
changed, my entire view of myself in a lot of ways because it was like, oh, I went from like not having any, not being accepted into any school. And while it was a technical error, I still felt like it was a reflection on me. And so I was like, oh, I'm a failure. I had a lot of internalized shame about that. But now it's like, oh, I went and moved to Shanghai. Like I went and saw a teacher that I had in elementary school. And she was the one who made me hate math. She was not, sometimes you have teachers that you just don't get along with, and sometimes there are teachers that are just not great at their job, and that sucks. But I saw her and she was like, oh, you're, back in your hometown. What's up with that? And I was like, oh, I just got back from China. And it was like this, like, oh, I'm doing things. Like, I'm capable and I'm, it's not a reflection on me that there was an error in this. And like before, I used to not tell people like why. I was like, oh yeah, I just took a gap year. I didn't want to tell people that like I goofed, like, or that someone had messed up and that had led to me not getting into universities. And that was, a crushing realization. And it worked out so wonderfully because we went to Amsterdam on the, on the European immersion tour. That was the first time I ever went to Amsterdam. I fell in love with the city. My roommate in China is the one who convinced me to apply to universities in Amsterdam. Oh. And I mean, I still talk to her pretty much every day. We're very close. She's from Slovakia. And she's like, you need to apply to a school in Amsterdam. You love that city. And so I applied and I got in and she was like, why are you not going? Like, what is the reason? I was like, there is no reason. And so now I'm here,
That's crazy. Oh wow. It sounds like it just totally like opened your world in so many ways.
Like there, this wouldn't have happened. I probably would have stayed at a, Vermont University or somewhere close to home. And being away from home, as much as I love, I love my home and I, my dog's there and my dad's there and that my family lives there. But it's amazing to like live in this, incredible city. If it wasn't 11 o'clock at night, I could show you how, the view out my window is amazing. I have a canal right in front of my window. Like it's amazing.
I'm jealous. Alexa, Faith, what about you guys?
So what I would have to say is something that I've kind of touched on earlier. The advice I would want to give is don't be afraid to be different, but also keep the balance of, connecting with other people on a different level, being very open-minded to the person that you want to be, that you choose to be. When I was in Thailand, so throughout my gap year, I did an internship that has nothing to do with what I was doing and what I'm doing now. But it definitely taught me a lot as far as being alone in a completely new city, having to go out and meet my own friends and, handle certain situations on my own. It definitely gave me the confidence to be alone and to understand that life throws different things at you, as far as like, you may be friends with someone for 2 years and then all of a sudden they're not your friend anymore. Or you may be dating someone for 5 years and then all of a sudden, they just leave your life. And I think the gap year definitely helped me in a way of learning that, and then also figuring out some of the things that I love to do and what I'm capable of doing, definitely brought out qualities in myself that I didn't really know I could do. Or maybe they were just lingering and I eventually learned to be confident in them. Yeah.
Love that. Faith, any reflections you want to share?
I think when it comes down to my gap year, I realize like how confident I am within like my own identity, you know, especially because people always have like, sometimes they'll have like questions that might be a little bit offensive, or you know what I mean, like people are always kind of like testing you in a way, even though they might not know that they are, you know, they might have something to say or some kind of, you know. And when you're like one of the only people there that is in your own community, you realize you have to kind of be like the person to like guard your community and like tell them like what's right and what's wrong, you know. And some people it's like really intimidating for them to, you know, defend yourself and defend like your culture and like who you are, you know. But for me, I was never opposed to educating, you know, somebody if they needed to know something or if they said something that was wrong. And I guess like I didn't really realize um that before I left because, well, I'm at home, you know, I'm just surrounded like by my own community. So I didn't realize how strong in my identity I was until that was kind of, you know, tested on my journey.
Wow. That's a really good point. And I mean, the fact that you're here today and sort of like doing your part in sharing your story and sort of, um, especially in spaces, as you mentioned, where it's not as diverse as it could be, I think that is a testament to that as well. And it's actually a great chance for me to answer this great question that we got from an attendee that says, what recommendations do you have for people who have privilege in some areas to be good allies to other people in the group who come from more marginalized identities? That is a great question.
If I can touch on that, I feel like just recognize your privilege or recognize your background. And just like Rebekah said, just be a decent person, right? That's all you really need to do to get along in society and to get along with other people that may have different backgrounds. And also recognize, you know, I think something that's super important that I continue to learn today is that you're not going to get along with everyone. And so I feel like if you recognize that, you know, find your people, find the people that make you laugh, that make you feel good about yourself, and not necessarily stay away, but, you know, respect people that you don't get along with. You don't necessarily have to pretend like, oh, I get along with you, right? You can just respect them from a distance and go about your business, right? So I think that's super important.
Well said. Any other thoughts? How to be a good ally?
I would say for me, the biggest thing is, you know, if you see something happening and you say, you know, this is applies to everyday life. This is not, I can't say I've ever seen someone on an EF trip get harassed, but I've also seen people just have it happen to them in the street. I think it just happens sometimes. And if you see that happening, you know, step up. That's, you know, I definitely like am hyper aware of the fact that I'm super light skinned and, you know, I look like a carbon copy of my very Irish father and I look nothing like my very brown mother. And so I lucked out in the sense that, you know, I have the white privilege and I can absolutely use it as a weapon of, you know, furthering, you know, helping other people. And, you know, if I it sucks that people sometimes listen to people that are like them more than other people. But sometimes that's, you know, if you are like them, use it. You know,
Yeah.
there's no reason to not do that.
I mean, definitely seems like a theme amongst all of your stories is just kind of being, yeah, like having good intention, and sort of on both ends, right? Whether you are the person that feels like they're being marginalized or the person that doesn't want to marginalize someone else, leading with that good intent, being open-minded, and yeah, just treating them with respect. And I definitely want to make sure that I end on this question. But what advice do you guys have for people who are thinking about going abroad, doing a gap year like this, who may have fears or feel that they are different in some ways? What would you say to those people?
That
Um,
you. Oh, oh,
you can go, it's fine.
I've spoken so much. Faith, you go first.
Okay. I think when it comes down to traveling, especially, I was just talking to my mom about this. A lot of times we focus on how different we are, from other people, and we don't realize how vast this world is. There's so many people who are so different from everybody. I don't think everybody's going to be focusing on just you. Like you might be different, at where you are at home, but when you go somewhere else, you might feel completely home there. I don't know, like for me especially, well, for Black people in general, a lot of times they feel like they can't necessarily travel because they think that when they travel, it's going to be just like so much hate spewed. You know what I mean? And that's definitely due to the media a lot of times. We have so much negative coverage, in the media. And so it's like a scary thing, which is why like traveling abroad is not really that common, because they feel like they might, I don't know, be hate crimed, or somebody might, just anything. And so I was telling my mom, like, that can happen here too. I live in Michigan. Okay, it's not that nice outside of Detroit. So why would you choose to stay in a place where it might happen here too, as opposed to traveling and the potential of it happening, there too? Things happen no matter where you go, but I don't think you should let that hinder you from experiencing the world. If I were to stay at home because, oh, well, Japan is 99% Japanese people, what if they point at me, or what if they say something to me? You know what I mean? If I would have stayed at home under that like mindset, I would have never got the experience that I got. I would have never learned how much I love Japanese. Like there's so many things out there for you to experience. But at the same time, I mean, of course, don't give up your identity as well. Like that is who you are, and you should definitely be confident in who you are. But I don't think you should let your identity dictate your life.
That is so powerful. I think very well said.
Yeah, I think you're not as alone as you think you are. I think that's a big thing. I think people tend to go, oh no, no one else knows what I'm experiencing. And it's like, you can tell people, and maybe someone can empathize, but pretty much everyone can sympathize, and they can do what they can. Tell people what you need for support, and 99.9% of the time they'll do everything in their power to get it for you, especially at EF. Like that 99.9 turns into 100%. Every time I've had a conversation with someone from EF, they're like, how can we hook you up? When I applied to university, had to read all this stuff in Dutch. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And I posted on my Instagram story, and the EF Gap Year Instagram account messaged me as like, do you need someone who speaks Dutch? Do you need a translator? And I was like, thank you. I had actually found someone that I had been in China with who had attended the EF language school. And so it was this, again, a connection, but like they're so willing to help. So you're not as alone as you think you are. And if you think you're super alone, communicate it and you will be less alone.
Yeah, it's very well put. It reminds me of that quote, what you said earlier. The quote that's like, be kind to everyone because you don't, like, everyone is fighting their own battle, sort of, even if it's not exactly the same one as you. I mean, it definitely sounds like, even though the theme of this panel is your identities abroad, that our identities, sometimes they can be a source of fear, sometimes they can be a source of pride, but ultimately they just add texture to this larger experience that we have in the world, which is about understanding how ultimately we're all just humans and finding belonging in unexpected ways. And yeah, and surprising, I mean, in many ways, your identities were all totally transformed because you stepped outside of what you thought was possible or outside of those fears. So it's really about smashing those identities, actually, smashing and recreating. Anyways, I'm rambling, but I think we're actually at time. This has just been such a great conversation, and I know topics like these can be difficult to discuss openly. So I just want to thank you all so much for your time and your bravery and your wisdom, and just being open to this experience. And hopefully our guests feel the same way. And yeah, I guess if there are no other questions, do you guys have any last thoughts that you want to throw out there? It's okay if not.
I the only thing I can really wrap up and say is just go for it. Just go for it. It'll be worthwhile. And even if you do come to a position where you are feeling a certain way, just like Rebekah said, communicate it. So I just agree with these two. So
That, yeah, and I mean, our staff are also here. If you do travel with us, our staff are here every step to kind of help you work through that and guide you through this. So you're also not alone, literally. But yeah, thank you guys again so much. And I hope that all of you guys enjoyed this discussion and meeting each other, because this is your first time, getting to know each other. So, all right. Thanks everyone for coming and listening, and have a good night. Bye.